Son ignored for a golden girl, a hidden will changes everything. Roots of pain. I've been trimming hedges and planting roses in the manicured gardens of California's elite for years now, and let me tell you, the lives of the rich are a lot messier than their lawns. You see things when you're out here under the sun, sweat on your brow, dirt under your nails, things folks in these glass-walled mansions think nobody notices. I'm a gardener, used to be a Marine, and I've learned to keep my eyes sharp and my mouth shut. But some stories stick with you, like thorns you can't shake off. This one's about a family up in Beverly Hills, the kind of people who own the kind of house you see in magazines. It's about a kid named Xavier, his father York, and a whole lot of pain rooted deeper than the oaks I pruned. I first saw Xavier when I started working at York's estate, a sprawling place with marble fountains and a view of the Pacific that'd make you forget the world's a mess. York's a media mogul, the kind of guy who owns half the billboards in LA, and probably a few politicians too. But you wouldn't know it looking at him. Gray hair, tired eyes, always carrying this weight like he's haunted. I heard from the staff that it started when his wife, Delilah, died. She passed giving birth to Xavier, and York never got over it. The house is like a shrine to her, photos on every wall, her old jewelry still in a velvet box on the dresser, her perfume bottles gathering dust. It's eerie, like she's still walking the halls. Xavier was about 10 when I first showed up, a skinny kid with dark curls and eyes that looked too old for his face. He'd sit on the porch, reading books thicker than my arm, while I wrestled with the rose bushes. I'd catch him staring at the photos of Delilah, like he was trying to piece together a mom he never knew. I got it. Losing someone you love leaves a hole. And I've seen my share of holes, back in the Corps, when a buddy didn't make it home. But Xavier wasn't just missing his mom. He was invisible to his dad. York wasn't cruel, not in the way you'd think. He made sure Xavier had clothes, food, a fancy school. But there was no warmth, no good job, son, when Xavier brought home straight A's. York was a ghost in his own house, going through the motions. Then there was Elise, the girl who changed everything. She wasn't York's daughter, not by blood, but you'd think she was his whole world. Elise's dad, York's best friend, died in a car crash when she was 6. York took her in, raised her like his own, and poured everything into her: money, time, pride. Elise was all sunshine and charm, blonde hair bouncing as she'd skip through the garden, chatting up the staff like she owned the place. Xavier, though, he was the shadow trailing behind. I remember one day I was raking leaves by the pool when I heard them arguing. Xavier, maybe 16 then, was clutching a science fair trophy, his face lit up like he'd won the lottery. "Dad, I got first place," he said, voice shaking with hope. York barely looked up from his phone. "That's nice, Xavier," he said, then turned to Elise, who was practicing some cheer routine nearby. "Elise, honey, you ready for that audition tomorrow? I'll get the driver to take you." Xavier's face fell, and he walked off, trophy dangling at his side. I kept raking, but it stuck with me. I'd seen that look before, guys in the Corps who realized no one had their back. Elise wasn't a bad kid, not at first. She'd smile at me, ask about the flowers, even help me plant some tulips once. But she knew how to work York. By the time she was in high school, she had him wrapped around her finger. New dresses, private tutors, a horse for her birthday. York gave her everything. Xavier got the leftovers. I overheard York once talking to Fiona, Elise's aunt, in the driveway. Fiona's a cold one, all sharp edges and designer sunglasses, but she's got a knack for cutting through the bullshit. "You're spoiling her, York," she said. "What about Xavier?" York just shrugged. "He's fine. Elise needs me more." Fiona gave him a look like she knew something he didn't, but she didn't push. Xavier tried, God knows he did. He'd stay up late studying, join the soccer team even though he hated it, just to get York's attention. One time, I was fixing a sprinkler near the garage when Xavier came home covered in mud from practice. He was beaming, said he'd scored a goal. York was there, tinkering with his vintage Mustang alongside Elise, who was going on about some prom dress. Xavier held up his muddy cleats like a trophy. "Dad, I scored today." York glanced over, nodded, then went back to Elise. "That's great, kid. Elise, you sure about the blue dress? I can get the designer on the phone." Xavier stood there, cleats in hand, until he just turned and walked inside. I wanted to say something, but what do you say to a kid who's fighting a war he can't win? It wasn't just the big moments. It was the little ones that cut deeper. York would take Elise to Lakers games, leaving Xavier with a nanny. Elise got a brand new MacBook for school. Xavier got a hand-me-down laptop that crashed every other day. When Xavier won an essay contest, his English teacher called York in for a meeting, raving about how Xavier could be a writer someday. York just grunted, asked if he'd get him a scholarship for sports. I wasn't in the room, but the maid told me Xavier's face turned red and he didn't speak for the rest of the day. I got to talking with Aaron, this young guy who helps me with the heavy lifting. He's got a big mouth, always asking questions. Why is York so hard on his kid? He asked one day, hauling mulch bags. I didn't have an answer, not really, but I remembered a night in the Corps when a guy I trusted sold me out to save his own skin. That betrayal stuck with me, and I saw it in Xavier's eyes every time York picked Elise over him. I told Aaron, some folks get so caught up in their own pain, they forget who's standing right in front of them. By the time Xavier was 18, things got worse. College was coming up, and he'd gotten into a solid school, UC Davis, with plans to study environmental science. He had big dreams, green tech, saving the planet, that kind of thing. I'd hear him talk about it when he thought no one was listening, sketching solar panels in a notebook by the garden. But York? He was all in on Elise's dreams. She wanted to be a fashion designer, and York was ready to bankroll her whole career. I was pruning hedges one afternoon when I overheard Xavier and York by the patio. Xavier was nervous, hands in his pockets. Dad, I got into Davis. Can you help with tuition? I'll pay you back, I swear. York didn't even look at him. I'm covering Elise's tuition at Parsons. It's expensive, Xavier. We can't afford both. Xavier's voice cracked. Parsons? That's in New York. You're paying for her to go across the country? York just nodded, like it was obvious. She's got potential. You'll figure it out. I stopped pruning for a second, gripping the shears tight. Figure it out? The kid was 18, busting his ass, and his dad was telling him to fend for himself while Elise got a free ride. Xavier didn't say another word. He walked off, head down, and I knew that was the moment something broke. A week later, I saw him packing boxes into a beat-up Honda. He was moving out, no goodbye, no nothing. I caught his eye as he loaded the last box. You good, kid? I asked. He gave me a half smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Yeah, I'll be fine. But I knew he wasn't. Aaron asked me later why I didn't say more, why I didn't tell York he was screwing up. I just shook my head. Not my place. Folks like York don't listen to guys like me. But as I watched Xavier's car disappear down the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd seen this before, good people left behind because someone else was too blind to see their worth. I kept working, kept my head down, but I knew Xavier's story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Price of ambitions. The sun beats down on these California estates like it's trying to burn away the secrets, but it never does. I've been working gardens from Malibu to Santa Barbara long enough to know that money buys a lot. Yachts, private jets, reputations, but it doesn't buy truth. I'm just a gardener, a former Marine who's seen enough to know when a storm's brewing. And in York's mansion, the storm was Xavier, a kid who kept fighting for his dad's love, only to get kicked to the curb for Elise, the golden girl who could do no wrong. I told Aaron, my young sidekick with too many questions, that this story wasn't just about a father and son. It was about what happens when you bet everything on the wrong horse. After Xavier left home at 18, I didn't see him for a while. I'd hear bits and pieces from the staff, though maids gossip worse than soldiers on leave. Xavier had moved to a cramped apartment in Oakland, working odd jobs to pay for community college classes. He was still chasing that dream of green tech, scribbling ideas for solar panels and wind turbines in a beat-up notebook. I'd seen him with that notebook years ago, sitting by the roses, sketching like his life depended on it. Back then, I thought he'd make it big, but life's got a way of grinding down even the best dreams, especially when your own dad's rooting against you. York, meanwhile, was doubling down on Elise. She was at Parsons in New York, studying fashion design on his dime. I'd overhear him on calls, wiring her thousands for portfolio materials or networking events. Once, I was clearing weeds by the pool when he got a call from her. Daddy, I need a new camera for my shoots, he said, voice all sugar. York didn't even blink. Whatever you need, honey, I'll send it. I remember thinking, man, that's a camera Xavier could have used for a whole semester's tuition, but York didn't see it that way. To him, Elise was a star in the making, and Xavier was just there. I got more of the story from Fiona, Elise's aunt, who'd drop by the estate now and then. She's a sharp woman, all tailored suits and icy stares like she's sizing up everyone for a fight. I was trimming hedges one day when she lit a cigarette and started talking, more to herself than me. "York's obsessed," she said, exhaling smoke. "Always was, even before Elise's mom died." That caught my ear. I kept my head down, clipping away, but I listened. Fiona said York and Elise's mom, Clara, were close, real close, before Delilah came along. When Clara died in that car crash with Elise's dad, York took it hard, like he owed her something. That's why Elise got the world while Xavier got scraps. Fiona flicked her cigarette into the dirt and muttered, "He's gonna regret this." I didn't ask what she meant. Marines learn not to poke hornets' nests. Xavier wasn't giving up, though. I heard he'd teamed up with Zachary, a buddy from high school who was starting a green tech company. Zachary was a good guy, lanky with a quick laugh, always tinkering with gadgets. They were working out of a garage, trying to build some kind of solar battery. Xavier was pouring everything into it, late nights, early mornings, living off instant noodles. He'd also met Grace again, his old high school crush. She wasn't the cheerleader type like Elise. Grace was intense, a lawyer now, helping startups navigate patents and contracts. I saw them once when I was working a job in Oakland, sitting outside a coffee shop. Xavier was showing her his sketches, and she was nodding, her eyes lit up like she believed in him. For the first time in years, Xavier looked like he had a shot at something real. Back at the estate, York was sinking deeper into Elise's dreams. I was raking gravel in the driveway when I overheard him on the phone talking about selling his yacht, Delilah's dream, named after his wife. That boat was his pride, a floating monument to her memory. But Elise needed money for her fashion brand, some high-end line of dresses nobody could afford. York sold the yacht, then took out loans, then remortgaged the house. The staff started whispering about his finances getting tight. I saw the strain on his face, bags under his eyes, hands shaking when he thought no one was watching. He was all in on Elise, like she was his last chance to make something right. Aaron, hauling mulch bags one day, asked me why York was so blind. Guy's got a son who's killing himself to make it, and he's blowing everything on a girl who's not even his. I shrugged, but it got me thinking about a mission in the Corps. Back in '03, we were pinned down, and my squad leader bet on a bad call, trusted the wrong intel, cost us 2 guys. York was like that, betting on Elise, ignoring the kid right in front of him. I told Aaron, some people can't see past their own ghosts. Then came the day Xavier found out about the yacht. I wasn't there, but the housekeeper told me what happened. Xavier had stopped by the estate to grab some old books, maybe hoping to patch things up with York. He saw a real estate guy leaving papers in hand and asked York what was going on. York admitted he'd sold Delilah's dream to fund Elise's brand. Xavier lost it. "You sold Mom's boat?" he shouted. "For her?" York tried to explain, said Elise's career was taking off, that it was an investment. Xavier didn't buy it. "You never invested in me," he said, voice breaking. Not once. York just stood there, silent, as Xavier grabbed his books and stormed out. That was the last time he set foot in the house. I saw Xavier a few months later working a side gig at a hardware store while I was picking up tools for a job in Malibu. He looked tired, older than 20, with calluses on his hands and a determined set to his jaw. I asked how he was holding up. "Surviving," he said, forcing a smile. "Zachary's got a prototype working. Grace is helping with the legal stuff. We're gonna make it." But his eyes told a different story, hurt, deep, and raw, from years of being second best. I wanted to tell him about my own days after the Corps, scraping by, wondering if I'd made the right call, leaving the only life I knew, but I just nodded. "Keep fighting, kid." York's world kept spinning, but it was starting to wobble. I heard from Fiona that Elise's brand was flopping, too expensive, no buyers. She was posting on Instagram, all glitz and parties in New York, but the numbers weren't adding up. York was taking out more loans, maxing out credit cards, even dipping into his company's funds. The staff started getting paid late. One day, I was planting azaleas when Fiona pulled up, her face tighter than usual. "He's going to lose everything," she said, lighting another cigarette. "And for what? A girl who's playing him." I asked if she'd told York. She laughed, bitter. "He doesn't listen, never has." Xavier, meanwhile, was clawing his way up. His startup with Zachary was getting traction, small grants, a few investors sniffing around. Grace was a godsend, negotiating contracts and keeping the vultures at bay. But every step forward came with a reminder of what he'd lost. He'd see Elise's posts online, her in Paris, her with a new designer bag, all paid for by York. Each one was like a punch to the gut. I caught him once checking his phone outside that same coffee shop, staring at a photo of Elise on a red carpet. He didn't say anything, just put the phone away and went back to his sketches. I knew that, look, same one I had when I saw my old squad leader's name in the paper, praised for a mission that cost me everything. Aaron kept bugging me about Xavier. Why doesn't he just confront York? Call him out? I shook my head. Kid's been trying his whole life. Sometimes you gotta walk away to save yourself. I remembered walking away from my own family after the Corps. Too many fights, too many promises broken. Xavier was doing the same, building something new, but I could tell the weight of York's betrayal was still there, heavy as ever. By the time Xavier was 22, he'd cut contact with York completely. No calls, no visits, nothing. I'd see York sometimes pacing the estate, looking like a man who'd lost more than a yacht. Elise was still in New York, burning through his money, while Xavier was out there fighting for his place in the world. I didn't know what would happen next, but I had a feeling the past wasn't done with either of them. In the Corps, we had a saying, you can't outrun your shadow. York's shadow was long, and Xavier was still running. Ashes and hope. The thing about gardens is they don't lie. You can't fake a wilted rose or an overgrown hedge. People, though, they fake everything. Smiles, promises, regrets. I've been tending the lawns of California's elite for years, a former Marine who's seen enough to know when someone's hiding from the truth. In York's Beverly Hills mansion, the truth was a storm that finally broke, and it hit Xavier, his son, hardest of all. I'd been watching this family unravel for over a decade, clipping hedges while York poured his heart and wallet into Elise, the girl he raised like a daughter, leaving Xavier to fend for himself. Now, years later, the bill was due, and I was still here raking leaves, watching the fallout. Aaron, my young partner with a mouth that never quits, kept asking how it all ended. I told him, it ain't over till the roots are gone. Xavier was 28 when I heard York reached out to him the first time in years. I was working a job in Malibu, pruning palms, when the housekeeper from York's estate filled me in. York had called Xavier, voice shaky, asking for money. Money. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. York, the media mogul who'd bankrolled Elise's every whim, her failed fashion brand, her Paris trips, her penthouse apartment, was drowning in debt. I'd seen the signs for years. Late paychecks for the staff, fewer cars in the driveway, the estate's upkeep slipping. York had sold Delilah's dream, remortgaged the house, even cashed out part of his company to keep Elise's dream alive. And Elise, she was gone. Word was her brand tanked, and she'd moved to Miami, dodging York's calls. Aaron, hauling dirt bags beside me, laughed when he heard. Karma's a bitch, huh? I didn't laugh. I'd seen karma in the Corps, guys who made bad calls and paid for it later. It's never as clean as you want. I got curious, so I started digging, talking to folks who still knew York. Fiona, Elise's aunt, was my first stop. I found her at a cafe in Santa Barbara, still sharp as a blade, sipping espresso in a black blazer. She didn't sugarcoat it. York's broke, she said, lighting a cigarette. He bet everything on Elise, loans, credit cards, the works, even invested in some tech startup she was pushing with her college friends. It flopped, big time. I asked about Xavier. Fiona's eyes softened, just a fraction. He's doing all right, built something of his own, didn't need York's money. She paused, then added, York's paying for it now. Elise won't even return his text. I nodded, thinking of a night in the Corps when my squad leader left me hanging during a firefight. Betrayal sticks with you like dirt you can't wash off. Xavier, it turned out, had made it. His startup with Zachary was taking off. Green tech, solar batteries, the kind of thing he'd sketched in that old notebook by the roses. They landed a big investor, and Xavier was running the show. A manager now, not just a kid with dreams. Grace, his high school sweetheart turned lawyer, was a big part of it. She'd helped protect their patents, fought off shady competitors. I saw them once outside their new office in Oakland, laughing over coffee. Xavier looked different, taller, somehow, like he'd grown into his own skin. But I could still see the kid who'd stood in York's garage, holding a soccer trophy, waiting for a nod that never came. York's call to Xavier came out of nowhere. I got the details from Mrs. Peterson, an old friend of Delilah's who'd known the family forever. She was at York's estate, dropping off a casserole like she still owed Delilah something. She told me York had tracked Xavier down, desperate. He's lost everything, she said, shaking her head. The house is in foreclosure. He asked Xavier for a loan. Can you believe it? I could. York had spent years choosing Elise, selling off pieces of his life to fund her, and now he was crawling to the son he'd ignored. Mrs. Peterson said. Xavier listened, quiet, then told York to call Elise instead. She's your star, right? He said, voice cold. York didn't have an answer. He mumbled something about regretting his choices, but Xavier hung up. I felt a twist in my gut, remembering a letter I never sent to my own dad after the Corps, words I couldn't bring myself to say. Aaron, hearing this, was all fired up. Xavier should have told him to go to hell, he said, tossing a shovel in the truck. I shrugged. Kid's got a right to his anger, but York's still his dad. I thought about my own ghosts, guys I lost overseas, choices I made that still wake me up at night. Xavier wasn't just fighting York. He was fighting the weight of all those years. The birthdays York forgot, the games he never showed up for, the time Xavier got his driver's license, and York didn't even look up from his paper. I remembered Xavier at 16, coming home after his first breakup with Grace, eyes red, hoping York would notice. York just told him to stop moping and went back to talking about Elise's cheer competition. Then Grace changed the game. She was digging into some legal stuff for Xavier's startup when she stumbled across a bombshell. Delilah's will. I got this from Fiona, who'd heard it from a lawyer friend. Delilah had left a trust fund for Xavier, a chunk of money meant to set him up, college, a house, a future. York had hidden it, buried it in some offshore account, thinking Xavier didn't need it. Fiona said Delilah's will was clear. Equal support for her son, no exceptions. York ignored it, funneling everything to Elise instead. Grace, sharp as ever, tracked down the paperwork and confronted York. I wasn't there, but Fiona said it was ugly, York stammering, claiming he'd meant to tell Xavier. Grace tearing into him about fiduciary duty and betrayal. Xavier was there, silent, just taking it in. I could imagine his face, that same quiet hurt I'd seen when he was a kid, holding a trophy York didn't care about. I was planting succulents in Malibu when I heard York showed up at Xavier's office a week later. The housekeeper saw it go down. York looked like hell, grayer, thinner, like the weight of his mistakes had finally crushed him. He brought a letter, one he'd found in Delilah's old jewelry box. It was from her, written before Xavier was born, when she was pregnant and scared she might not make it. She begged York to love their son, to see him for who he was, not as a reminder of her. York read it to Xavier, voice breaking, and said he was sorry. Not just for the money, but for everything. The years of neglect, the comparisons, the way he'd made Xavier feel like he wasn't enough. Xavier didn't say much, just nodded. But the housekeeper said his hands were shaking. Xavier had a choice to make. Grace had the trust fund paperwork ready to go, millions, enough to change his life. He could take it, cut York off, and walk away clean. Or he could help his dad, the man who'd chosen Elise over him every time. I heard from Mrs. Peterson that Xavier offered York a job instead, not a handout, but a low-level role at his startup, testing batteries, something humble. York balked at first, pride still clinging to him like old vines. But a few days later, he showed up at the office, toolbox in hand, ready to work. I don't know if it was guilt or desperation, but I saw York myself that week, driving a beat-up sedan instead of his old Bentley, looking like a man who'd finally seen his own shadow. Aaron asked me what I thought about it as we loaded clippers into the truck. Xavier's stronger than I'd be, I said. I thought about my own dad, how I never got the chance to settle things before he passed. Xavier was giving York a shot, but not the one York wanted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, more like a test. I wondered what Fiona knew, though. She'd hinted at something more, some secret about York and Elise's mom, that might explain why he'd gone all in on her. I didn't ask. Some roots run too deep to dig up without breaking something. I was back at York's estate last week, mowing the lawn for what might be the last time. The bank's got the place now. Xavier's doing all right, building his company, living with Grace in a modest place in Oakland. They're planning something big, maybe an IPO. I saw him drop by to pick up some old photos of Delilah, and he looked at peace, like he'd finally outrun that shadow. York's still working for him, clocking in every day, quiet, no complaints. I don't know if they'll ever talk about that letter again, or if Fiona's secret will ever come out. Maybe it doesn't matter. Xavier's built his own life, and that's something no one, not York, not Elise, can take away. As I packed up my tools, Aaron asked if I thought Xavier did the right thing. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the core, about the guys who made it home and the ones who didn't, about the choices that haunt you and the ones that set you free. He did what he had to, I said finally. Sometimes that's enough. I looked out at the estate, the grass still green despite everything, and figured life's like a garden. You keep tending it, even when the roots are a mess. Thanks so much for watching. Your likes, subscriptions, and comments mean the world, and keep these stories coming.